Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi, 1 week at a time, Masechet Bava Metzia. This week is our 11th class. This is a long Masechet, and today we are going to be reviewing Daf 71 through Daf 77. So Daf 71 tells us, again, we're in the topic of lending money, and we've been discussing lending it and not adding interest. So Daf 71 tells us that if you only have enough money to lend one person, so the verse in the Torah says that you should lend it to a Jew. A Jew takes precedence over a non-Jew. A poor person takes precedence over a rich person. A person from your city takes precedence over a person in another city. And even though, as we learned last week, you could, if you need to, you could charge interest to a non-Jew, you have an obligation to lend money to the Jew without interest, as opposed to lending to the non-Jew with interest. So it is important to recognize that. Okay. People who lend without interest may fall, but will come out of it, meaning God will reward you. Even if it seems that you're losing money from the deal, God will reward you, and you will not be punished. If you lend with interest, then there will be a punishment. From here, the Gemara talks about two types of the word ger in Hebrew. Hold on 1 second. I hear that there's some problems with the video. So I'm gonna keep talking, but it could be I'm in another office, so it could be it's the internet. So I apologize. But okay. Are other people also having internet problems? Can other people also not see me? Okay. All right. I'm just gonna keep going. I apologize. Okay. So the Gemara talks about two types of, I guess we would call it converts. What's called a ger tzedek, that is a person that we would call a convert, someone who decides that they want to be Jewish. And then there's something called a ger toshav. And that means a person who is who's a non-Jew, who lives in Israel, and that person takes upon themselves the 7 Noachide laws, the Sheva Mitzvot B'nei Noach. So the Gemara talks about these two people who live in Israel. If a person becomes poor, so they're allowed to sell themselves to another person. A convert shouldn't sell themselves as a slave, and a woman is not allowed to buy a Jewish slave. If a convert buys a Jewish slave, it is valid, but if he dies, so then his children will not inherit those slaves. Okay, a woman can buy a non-Jewish slave, but not a Jewish slave. And as we mentioned, the ger toshav, the person who lives in Israel, they cannot charge, you cannot charge interest to him, or maybe you can. Again, he is non-Jewish, so there's a machloket if you can charge him interest or not. You can be a guarantor on a loan that includes interest. The Gemara says that lending Jews money a non-Jew who lends a Jew money and agrees to go directly to the borrower, so then, right, to collect the money, so then you can be the guarantor, because that person will be able to pay, and it is not for you. I hear that there's still some issue with the internet, so maybe I'll try to put on a mobile hotspot, and let me see if that is better. Let me know. Hold on 1 minute. Let me know if this is, let me see if this is better. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to stop the recording for a minute. Hold on. Okay. I hope the audio is a little bit better now. Okay. So we were talking about a Jew who lends money to a non-Jew, and then so again, a non-Jew lends money to a Jew, and then that Jew lends it to another Jew, as long as the non-Jew knows about it. This is as if the non-Jew is lending the money, and therefore, if the interest is there, then it is okay. You can't do the opposite. If the original lender is Jewish and a non-Jew wants to take the money that they borrowed and transfer it to another Jew, if the Jewish lender knows about it, it's as if he's doing the lending and charging interest, and that would be a problem, and therefore you cannot do it. And the question is the non-Jew seen as an agent for the Jew or not? Okay, Daf 72 talks about a Jew who borrowed money from a non-Jew with interest and then changed the loan to the total price, right? So if the person said, I'm borrowing $1,000 and the interest is $200, so now then they change the agreement and they say, you know what, the loan is for, or you owe me $1,200. And then the non-Jew converts, if they made the deal before he converted, so he can collect the full payment. And if not, then no. And the same thing with the opposite case. Let's say a document has interest written on it, and then a person gets a fine and can't collect any of the loan, right? Meaning, if you put in interest to a loan, so then we're going to fine that person for charging interest. So the question is it that they don't get to collect the entire loan? Or is it that you can collect the principal amount, but not the interest, right? So that's the machloket on how we penalize the person who charged interest. We know that a predated document is invalid, but a post-dated document is valid. This is, of course, because we're concerned about if we need to collect the loan from land, and if you don't know when the loan actually happened, we don't know which land falls under this loan. Let's say, now again, it's important to recognize that in a loan, sometimes they would use a piece of land as the collateral for the loan. In the meantime, that field produces produce. So let's say the lender ate from the produce of the field for 3 years. And then he told the borrower, you need to sell me this land, and if not, I'm going to lose, right? Within quotation marks, I'm going to lose the loan document, and then I'm going to claim that I bought it from you 3 years ago, and my proof is that I've been eating from the land for 3 years and you haven't said anything. We know that if a person eats from the land for 3 years, that's what's called a chazaka. A chazaka means you've established the fact that you have rights to this property. And basically he says, right, I'm going to trick you into selling me this land. So what can you do? So the Gemara says that the borrower can give the field to his minor son, right, under 13 years old, and pretend to sell the field to the lender, but he doesn't own it anymore. Therefore, it's invalid. And then what about the money that he owns him? So it is an oral agreement that he's going to pay. Therefore, he can collect, even though the document wasn't valid. Or no, it was a fake sale, and therefore he is not allowed to collect the money. Okay, the next Mishnah on Daf 72 tells us that you cannot set the price of produce till the market value is set, right? It seems that there was an established market value. You're not allowed to put up the prices of your produce till you see what the market value is. You can make a deal for fruit or produce, even if you don't have the produce in stock, because you can always just go down the block to the market and get that produce. And of course, the market value has to be set already. You can make a sale of grain, even if you haven't threshed it yet. Remember we said, and we said this last time, you can make a sale if you have the item in stock, right? This way, you don't get into problems of interest. But even if you haven't finished the processing, the different stages of processing, it's still seen as in stock. The same thing with grapes for wine, or lumps of clay to make an item. Fertilizer, you can always sell, or no, you need to have them in stock, right? Again, fertilizer was the dung of animals. That's something that you can get pretty easily. You can make a deal to buy produce now. Again, it has to be in stock to be delivered later on. Now, if the price falls in the meantime, the seller has to deliver the produce based on how much he paid at the price of delivery, or he can say, give it to me at today's price, or give me my money back, right? You can go back on the sale. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to discuss all of these ideas. Small markets need to wait to hear what the real market value is. And as we said, you have to wait for the market value of old grain, which is more expensive, right? Because it's dried out, it's easier to grind, and for new grain, right? That's what just came out on the market. Or you can make a deal on things as soon as the market value comes out. If you don't have it in stock, it's seen as a loan. And that's the issue, right? So if I'm selling oranges and I can't find any oranges and I sell it to you, it's as if I'm your, right? There's a loan going on here. And that is the issue. Daf 73 tells us that a person takes merchandise to sell in another town where he can get a higher price, but will pay for it later. So if the seller has a responsibility, what we call achrayut, for the item, so then it's okay, right? Because again, you're seen as the agent of the person. But if not, it's like a loan, and therefore it is not okay. The same thing with produce, right? You can say, give me your produce and I'll pay you. With my produce that I have in another place. Again, as we said, if he has it in stock, so then it's okay. And if not, then it's not okay. Now, donkey drivers, that's what we would call like truck drivers, they would sell their merchandise cheaper, and that's okay, because again, sometimes they have to, let's say, get rid of their stock because they have to load up with another stock. That's not seen as interest in any way, and that is okay. The Gemara gives stories of advanced payment at a reduced price. And the Gemara says this is okay with wheat, but not with other commodities. Again, as we said, advanced payment for a future yield of a vineyard is not okay. Or maybe it is okay, or maybe only when you use oxen to harvest the grapes. And then that would be okay. Let's say you buy a vine, so if you buy a vine, you should use the land also so that you acquire the land as well. Um, or you can work the land as well as receive the fruit. Now, the Gemara talks about interest with a sharecropper. Again, a sharecropper is a person who will farm the land of somebody else with the understanding that they get a percentage of the yield of their crops. Right? The longer he stays, the more he gets. And here the Gemara gives various stories of rabbis with a mashkanta, which in modern Hebrew means a mortgage. Here it means, right, pledged property, right? So if you take a loan, there's pledged property, a field that is like the collateral for that loan. And forward contracting, as we talked about before, selling produce now and only delivering it later. Let's say you paid for wine in advance, so you can check later, and if the wine spoils and becomes vinegar, so then you can say, I'm not taking this, right? I paid you for wine, I didn't pay you for vinegar, and you can only take the wine that is okay. Some students would pay taxes for other people and then make them work for them, plus they would have to pay them back. And we say this is rebate, this is interest, right? You're getting someone's labor and the money. So maybe this is not okay, and it's seen as interest, or maybe it's okay because the law is that if a person pays your taxes, you have to work for them. So if that's the law, then it is okay. Okay, let's say a person gave money to another person to go and buy wine for him, and then he forgot to buy it. So you have to pay the investor and make up the difference in the current value, right? Again, if there was negligence, if I told you to go buy it now, there's a sale, and you didn't, so you lost me money. So you need to compensate me for the difference of price. Okay, Daf 74. 3 people gave money to an agent to buy produce for them, and he only bought for one person. So one option is the 3 people split what he bought. But if each person gave his own bundle of money, so whichever one he used, that's the one that gets the produce and not the other person and not the other people. You can put identification marks on the items that you bought, even if it's still in the seller's storage house or storage room. Right? It shows that it's fully yours. That is valid. Okay, so we were talking about selling something and it's seen as being in stock if you've completely processed it. If there are only 2 steps left to fully processing the item, right? Let's say grain, it goes through a very long processing process. So if there are only 2 or fewer stages or steps left to process the produce, so then you can make a deal on that item. But if it's 3 or more, you can't, because it's not seen as in stock, because you don't have wheat in stock, or you don't have, let's say, we'll call it, let's say, flour. You don't have flour in stock, you have grains of wheat or stalks of wheat, and it still has to go through a longer process. Or if it's in your control, meaning it's something you need to do, so then Even if there are 100 steps, you can still pay for it. But if it's not in your control, let's say you're waiting for the rain to fall and then the wheat will grow and then you can harvest it, then you can't sell it if that's what you're waiting for. You can make a deal on a pile of wheat, even though there's still 4 more steps, or no, the case is that it was already dried out, and therefore it is a later stage than we originally thought. You can make a deal on a basket of grapes or olives. Again, but there's still 4 steps left, let's say to winemaking or oil making. The Gemara says, no, the buyer is going to do the finishing steps, right? He's just selling wine. He's just selling the grapes or the olives, and then it is okay. You can make a deal at a cheaper price. And if you, let's say, back out of the deal, so then you're going to get a mishepara. If you remember, we learned about the concept of a mishepara. Mishepara is like a type of curse that if you're backing out of a deal, you really shouldn't. But if you do, it's not that it's invalid, meaning you really can back out of the deal, but it's not the proper thing to do. And therefore you get a mishepara, as we say. Let's say, right, just giving money, and this is important to recognize that if we have a sale for produce, just giving the money isn't an acquisition, right? You need to stipulate the deal at the time of transferring the money. And the Gemara actually says that the payment is binding on the buyer where there's only one price. But if the price, let's say, went down, so then the money isn't binding because we don't know at which rate you made the deal with. Okay, the next Mishnah on Daf, at the bottom of Daf 74. A person can lend to a sharecropper. He can lend him wheat, right, seeds, and he's going to take the wheat and he's going to plant it, but not for him to eat it. Rabban Gamliel always accepted the lowest price of wheat from his sharecroppers. He was very stringent on himself, right? Because really, you can take it back at a higher rate, but he didn't want it to look like he was charging interest. Therefore, he always took back at the lower rate. Okay, we talked about lending or giving wheat. You can only do this before he starts farming, but if he started farming already, so then you're not allowed to do it because again, it looks like there's going to be interest. This depends if the sharecropper brings the seed, brings the seeds, or if the owner supplies the seed, right? Again, if it looks like a loan, that's a problem. Right, Daf 75, the Gemara tells us, if you say, lend me wheat at this price, you can return it with wheat, right? So if you say, lend me a pound of wheat, so you can either return a pound of wheat or the value that it was when you borrowed it. If you didn't fix a price, right, if the wheat became cheaper, you pay with the wheat, meaning again, a pound for a pound. If it went up in price, you pay the value, right? Again, we want to make sure, and we'll talk about borrowing from one another, but what we want to make sure is that you're not paying back more than you borrowed in the first place. Okay, and that's this Mishnah right now. In the Gemara, it's called lending a se'ah for a se'ah, right? We would call it, right, lending a cup for a cup, right? So how many of us go to our neighbor and say, can you lend me a cup of sugar? I'll give you back a cup of sugar. What's the problem? A cup of sugar today doesn't have the same value as a cup next week. And therefore, we might end up paying back a loan, right? We borrowed, so it's a loan, and we might be paying with interest because we're paying more than we actually borrowed. So here it goes. So the Mishnah tells us, you can't say, lend me a core of wheat. Again, a core is a volume, a measurement, and I'll return to you a core of wheat. Right? Because again, as we said, the value might go up, and then it looks like interest. It is interest. Let's say you say, lend me a core of wheat till my son comes and he unlocks my storehouse, my warehouse. Right, I have my wheat right there. I just can't get to it. So Hillel says you're not allowed to do it. The Gemara, the first author of the Mishnah says you are allowed to do that because you have it. You just can't access it right now. It says that a woman can't lend. It's not specific. It doesn't mean specifically a woman, a person, but I guess this is what women do, right? When you're cooking, right? So a woman can't lend a loaf of bread to her neighbor because, again, for her to return the loaf of bread, because the price might go up, and when she returns it, she is now paying with interest. Okay, so the Gemara is going to explain, right? If you have a right, let's say I don't want to go to my basement to get more sugar. I'd rather go to my neighbor. So I say, can I borrow a cup of sugar? And I have a cup of sugar. I'll just give it back to you right from that cup of sugar. So then you're allowed to do it because I have it at that point. Or even if you just have a little bit, right? So let's say I don't have a whole cup of sugar. I have half a cup of sugar and I need another cup. So I say, can I borrow a cup? Even though I have that little amount, then it's okay. And then you can borrow as much as you want. But let's say you say, can I just borrow a little sugar? And you don't say a cup, a pound, a package, right? You just say, can I just borrow a little bit of sugar? So then you can return a little bit of sugar because it's not an exact measurement. And then that's not a problem. Okay. And then the Gemara tells us that the sages or wise people can lend with interest because when they lend with interest, what happens? They really look at it as a gift from one person to another, right? Here, I'm going to lend you $10 and then you're going to give me back $10 plus another dollar as like, thank you so much for giving me that $10. It was so nice. So I want to give you $11. So if I'm giving it to you as a gift, that's okay. I'm allowed to give gifts. I'm not allowed to be charged interest, but I am allowed to give a gift. Right? And then the Gemara talks about, are you allowed to, one opinion is you can charge interest to your children because you want to teach them the value of money and you don't want them to get used to borrowing money. And then the Gemara says, no, don't do it because it's a bad idea. So the Gemara says, no. Okay, last Mishnah of this chapter. The Mishnah says, you can say, you know what, can you come and weed my garden with me today? And then I'll come and weed your garden with you tomorrow. Or, right, I'll do this act for you, and then you'll do the same act for me another time, right? This is okay, even though it's like a loan, but it's a service. It's not seen as interest, but you have to do the same act because I can't say, can you come weed for me? And then I'll come and harvest with you. That's not okay. That is because it's a different act, right? It might be more strenuous, less strenuous, then it's seen as interest. Also, you have to do it in the same season, right? I can't say, right, come and weed my garden in the spring, and then I'll come with you in the winter to weed your garden, right? No, you have to do it in the same season so that it's seen as the same work. Okay, you're not allowed, so it's funny, we just said that I'm allowed to give you a gift, but you're not allowed to send a gift so that a person will loan you the money, right? That's called advanced interest. And you're not allowed to send a gift afterwards if you already paid the loan. This is called subsequent interest. And the Gemara seems to make a distinction between a little bit of money and a lot of money. So that seems to be the difference here. also it's important to realize that there's something called verbal interest, ribit dvarim. We would call this nowadays inside information, right? I can't say, lend me $100 and I'm going to give you a stock tip. That's not okay. That's seen as interest, which I think is fascinating that it's in the Gemara from, right, 2,000 years ago. And as we mentioned, right, interest involves the borrow, right? It's forbidden for the borrower, the lender, the witnesses, and the guarantors on the loan, and maybe even the scribe that wrote the document. And this is all based on the verses in the Torah. And now the Gemara explains, right, if you borrow, if the borrower greets the lender because he just lent him money, that's seen as interest, right? You're not allowed to be extra nice to the person who lent you money. That's interest. I guess you should really be nice to everybody. If you know the borrower doesn't have any money to pay you back, you shouldn't keep passing him on the street, right? This is like the other side of the coin, which is if you know that a person owes you money and you know that they can't pay you back now, don't bother them, right? Let them have their time. They'll come to you and they'll pay back when they can. And with that, we finish the 5th chapter. Okay, so that's it for interest. If you have any questions about interest, that was all in this past chapter. We are now moving on to a new topic. The topic we are moving to now is workers, like hiring workers to do work for you, and what is everybody's responsibility? What is the employer's responsibility, and what is the worker's responsibility? Second, okay, so the Mishnah says, if you hire workers and they trick each other, they can complain to one another, but they can't take the other person to court. And the Gemara is going to explain all of this. Let's say you hire a donkey driver to bring things that are time sensitive, right? The Gemara talks about for a wedding, for a funeral, right? You need it now, right? If you say I can deliver it to you next week, it doesn't help if the wedding is tomorrow. So if things are time sensitive, all right, then if the worker backs out, you can hire new workers, even if it costs more, and the original worker needs to pay the difference in the price. Or you can trick the original workers into working for you. And the Gemara is going to explain all of this. Let's say you hire workers and they back out. Let's say they do half the job and then they leave. So then they're at a disadvantage when they're trying to get the money that you owe them. If the employer backs out, then he is at the disadvantage. So Daf 76, the Gemara explains that what does it mean in the beginning of the Mishnah that the workers trick each other? So here the Gemara talks about we have an employer, we have a contractor, and we have the workers, right? So let's say, right, the employer says to the contractor, I'm willing to pay $3 an hour. And then the contractor goes and hires workers and says, we're going to pay $4 an hour, right? So if the workers agreed to the work, to work for the money that the contractor offered, so then it's okay. But the question is, what is the case? So now we're going to have 5 options of what the case is. So one option is that the contractor says that as we said, right, the contractor says that they're going to pay 4, but really the employer said he's going to pay 3. Now, in a place where workers are paid either 3 or 4, so then they can complain, but the employer only needs to pay 3 because that's what the employer said he was going to pay. That's option 1. 2, maybe the case is that the workers are really like homeowners. They're not really workers. And they only took the job because they were promised 4, right? Higher than the going rate. Another option is no, there really are workers. And they say, listen, we worked really hard because we thought we're getting 4. So, um, come and look at what we did. And then let's say it rains and you can't really tell if they did a great job. So then you only need to pay them 3 and not 4. Another option is the employer says he's going to pay 4 and the contractor says he's going to pay 3, right? This is the opposite case. So they accepted 3, but really they could have gotten 4. So they can complain, but really the employer can pay them 3 because that's what they agreed to, right? So if the worker says, okay, whatever the owner is going to pay me, I'll take it. So then they can get 4 because the owner said that he was going to pay 4. So the question is, right, when you take the job, do you trust the contractor or do you feel whatever the employer is going to pay me, that's what I want? And here the Gemara has the case of with get, right? We have this in Gittin. Remember we said, like, if you send an agent to pick up the get and he sends, let's say, an agent to deliver the get, right? Or let's say the woman's agent comes to the man and says, I came to get the get. And then there's a misunderstanding or the agent misquotes what the woman said. The question is the husband, does he believe the agent or is he doing, he doesn't care, whatever the wife wanted, that's what he wants to do. Okay. Another option 5 of what our case could be is that really the workers backed out of the job. So when it says that they deceived each other, it really means they reneged on the deal. And here we get into a discussion about different types of workers. There's something called schirut, which means a person who's hired at an hourly rate or by day, right? So he has the job for 5 days. Or there's the contractor who's contracted for a job. I want you to build my house, right? I don't know how many days it is or how many hours. I want you to do the job, right? So if workers show up, but let's say they can't work, right? Let's say you hired someone to work in your garden and now it's pouring rain, so they can't work in your garden. So the question is, do they get paid or not? They showed up. It's not their fault that they can't work. So one opinion is that they get paid, but at a different wage, right? They're not going to get paid for working in your garden because they can't work in your garden. So maybe they get paid for, right, I guess we would call it maybe minimum wage. If they started working and then they're like, you know what, I'm out of here, I don't want to do this anymore. So they get paid for what they did. Now, let's say you need to hire new workers and let's say they're more expensive. So they pay the difference, right? Because now you have to get new workers to pay. Or you evaluate what the work is that needs to be done and they get paid the difference of that value. Now, this is only with things that aren't time sensitive. But if they're time sensitive, you can trick them into working, right? So let's say you have a deal that they're going to, I don't know, paint your house. And then they're like halfway through, they're like, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. So but you need it painted. So if you say, I'll double your wage just to get them back into the house, the Gemara says you're allowed to do that and you do not have to double the wage because again, they're backing out of the original deal. Or you can hire very expensive workers, even if that's right, only if that's the only thing that is available. Again, let's say they show up and they can't work. So we said either you pay them the full wage or you pay the wage of an inactive worker, as I said, like minimum wage. However, right, let's say they come the night before and they scoped out the area. And they realized that maybe there's going to be a risk for tomorrow, right? Let's say they saw that the river might overflow or they know it's going to be raining. So if they saw the risk, then they don't get paid at all tomorrow if, let's say, it's raining or the river overflowed because they knew the risk. But if not, then they still do get paid. Okay, last daf for today. There's stories of workers who were hired. And as I said, let's say it rained and then the workers lose out because they knew the risk. They knew it was going to rain and that they wouldn't be able to work. If it was because the river overflowed and they had no idea that that could happen, so then the employer loses out and he has to pay them. If the workers finish their work in half the time, if he has similar work or easier, he can ask them to do it because again, he hired them for the day. So he can ask them to do more work. But if not, he's not allowed to say, okay, now go and, dig a well for me in my backyard, if that's not what they are doing. And therefore you have to pay them the whole day's work. It's not their fault that they just did it faster. Or you pay them the full wage of as many hours that they worked. And then the rest of the hours, you can pay them minimum wage because they're not really doing anything for the rest of the time. Okay, let's say the workers decide to stop working halfway through the day. Again, now they didn't do the job. So the worker doesn't lose out. He gets paid for the work that he did. And if they finish the work, so then they get the full price. If the worker's wage was low at the beginning of the day, and okay, so let's say their like minimum wage is $3. I don't know why I'm saying that, $30, whatever it is. Let's say the employer says, you know what? I'm going to pay you $35, right? I'm going to pay you extra. And then by the end of the day, minimum wage goes up to $35. So now what happens, right? He says, okay, here's your $35. They say, wait a minute, you are going to pay me minimum wage plus $5. So I want minimum wage, which is 35 plus 5, which is 40. So then the question is, right, do they get the original wage that they agreed on? Or if they back out now, right, the cost of a new worker would be $35 an hour. So therefore, he needs to pay the money that they want to get. If the employer backs out, so if he rehired the workers, he has to pay them, right, the original wage, even if the price went down in the meantime, right? Again, if you had a deal, you had a deal. Again, as we said, if whoever backs out of the deal has do we say the lower hand? I know you say the upper hand. What do you say? Is there a lower hand? I don't know. All right, so he gets the raw end of the deal. Okay, so the halacha is, again, if the worker backs out, he's at a disadvantage. But the Breita says that the worker can back out at any point and he gets paid for the work that he did. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute, why is the worker backing out? Let's say the worker finds out that somebody got sick in his family, or, you have to go pick up your child from daycare, right? This is what's called ones, right? It's not their fault. They need to leave. So because they can control it, they are not at a disadvantage and they get paid for what they worked. But if right, again, because it's against their will. But if they just back out, so then you have the lower I don't think that's the word, whatever, you're at a disadvantage. Or maybe we're talking about something, or maybe we're talking about something that is time sensitive. Remember, we said you're decorating the hall for the wedding. If you need to leave, that doesn't help me because tomorrow it doesn't help, right? I need it to be decorated today. So if it's going to get ruined, the worker is penalized for backing out. It doesn't matter if he was hired for the day or for the project. If he backs out and this is going to get ruined, he loses out. If you change the deal, then you get the raw deal. That's good. That's a good line. Or if you back out, again, if it's a sale and you back out, so the other person has the upper hand, right? You're at the disadvantage. And now the Gemara ends with the machloket about partial payments. We actually saw this previously, right? Let's say you put a down payment on a field, right? So let's say you pay half of the value. There's a machloket. Did you acquire the entire field? You're just paying in installments, or did you acquire half the field? You paid for half. That's how much you own. When you pay more, you'll own more. Wait, let's say if a person paid 90% of a sale price for the donkey, did he acquire the donkey or not? Right. So if the seller keeps saying to him, listen, you owe me another $1, let's go. Where's that $1? You owe me another $1. It shows that he wants the money. Therefore, you don't acquire the donkey till you paid in full. The same thing with the field. If the seller keeps asking you for the difference, it shows that the buyer didn't acquire the field till it is fully paid for. And with that, we are going to end for today. I see we have a little time, so if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, we will, I will see you next week. Be'ezrat Hashem.
It's not a question. It's not a question.